Welcome, everybody. Today we have with us Dr. Izabella Wentz, an internationally acclaimed thyroid specialist and licensed pharmacist. Her interest in thyroid disorders began with a diagnosis of Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009. Dr. Wentz is the author of the New York Times best-selling guide, Hashimoto's Thyroiditis: Lifestyle Interventions for Finding and Treating the Root Cause. She also has a new book in the works, Hashimoto's Protocol, a 90-day plan for reversing thyroid symptoms and getting your life back. Welcome, Dr. Izabella Wentz.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, John.
It's great to have you on the program. As you know, at Joyful Belly, we focus on gut health, digestion, and diet. And I know that that Hashimoto's has some relationship to health in that area of the body. So we're really excited to hear from you about some of the nuggets of wisdom and some tips that people can use to help them. Tell me, how did it feel when you were first diagnosed with Hashimoto's?
You know, a part of me was relieved because I had been struggling for almost a decade. I had a bunch of really crazy, odd symptoms. I had irritable bowel syndrome, I had acid reflux, I had panic attacks, I had joint pains, I had debilitating fatigue that kept me sleeping for 11, sometimes 12, sometimes 13 or 14 hours each night. I was walking around brain fogged. I really thought that my life was falling apart, and I was only in my 20s at the time. I went from doctor to doctor. I was told that everything was normal, that maybe I had antidepressant for my anxiety, that it was stress less, that perhaps I was depressed, and all these other things, that just were not really helpful. And I'm a pharmacist by training, so of course I knew all about medications, but I'm like, no, I'm not depressed. This doesn't quite fit. And I also realized that a lot of these things began happening after I developed irritable bowel syndrome during my first year of pharmacy school. And so it was as though my body was breaking itself apart step by step. And I believed that everything was connected. I thought, okay, well, if I have this thyroid condition, why did it start after the acid reflux? And why did I have irritable bowel syndrome before that? The conventional medical approach was just to take thyroid medications, which replace thyroid hormone that you no longer can produce because the immune system begins to attack your thyroid gland. Where I wanted to figure out what I can do to help myself get into remission and help to prevent additional damage to my thyroid gland and perhaps to reverse my condition and help my symptoms. And through this journey, I learned that the root cause of my thyroid condition was actually because of my gut.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, this is something I think a lot of people go through, is they have all of these symptoms, and it is bewildering. So that you were relieved to get the diagnosis would seem like a surprise or a paradox, but actually not knowing is much worse than getting some kind of clear understanding. And I can imagine that with your schooling that you got may have been a little disrupted. All that hard studying and anxiety around tests can sometimes lead to gut issues. But you said that it was all connected, that this gut health, and this is pretty surprising, I think, to me, that this gut health issues that you were having was somehow related to Hashimoto's. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How does that work?
Absolutely. So what a lot of people aren't aware of is that thyroid cells and gut cells develop from the same kind of origin. The fetal cells that go on to develop both of these are going to be the same. And gut health plays a tremendous role in thyroid health. When I began to study functional medicine, one of the key components of functional medicine is that the very first system that breaks down is the gut barrier and the gut wall. And after that, once the gut barrier breaks down, within 5 to 10 years, a person may get diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And this was my case as well. So during my first year in pharmacy school, I started having irritable bowel syndrome. And then within 5 to 10 years after that point, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I started to have more and more symptoms of thyroid tissue breakdown. An interesting thing, and most thyroid conditions are caused by an autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland. And the interesting thing is that for every autoimmune condition to develop, we need to have three things present. And that's the right kind of genetic predisposition, some sort of initiating trigger. This is usually around something that can potentially cause damage to the thyroid gland. And the third piece of that is intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So when your gut barrier and your gut wall doesn't work properly anymore, and this can be seen as symptoms like irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux, this can be bloating, this can be constipation. Any of these malfunctions mean that perhaps your gut barrier has been impaired. And as this is happening, eventually what goes on to happen is that the immune system, which is mostly derived in the gut, will start becoming more confused. And rather than attacking viruses and bacteria and all of these other great things that are, or all of these other horrible things that it protects us from, the immune system will eventually start attacking foods, which it's supposed to tolerate, as well as our own internal body tissues, for example, the thyroid gland in my case, and in the case of Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Yeah, so instead of attacking viruses, they're attacking a hamburger in your bloodstream, because there's not supposed to be a hamburger in your bloodstream. You're supposed to have digested it, but this leaky gut, I don't know if you use that word leaky, but I think that's what you're referring to, is this gut barrier breaking down, and intestinal permeability is permitting bits and pieces of the food that we've eaten into our bloodstream, and there are foreigners there. They're strangers. They've got to be removed. So the immune system is starting to focus on those instead of diseases. And then how does this end up as a thyroid attack? You said that thyroid and gut cells have the same origin, and I'm assuming that's a part of this equation here. That it's, instead of getting pancreatitis or inflammation of the lungs, right? It's turning to thyroiditis. How and why does that happen?
And that's a really great question. And so it could be any organ, any organ in the body could be attacked by the immune system. So it's not always the thyroid, but very commonly it is going to be the thyroid gland. One of the interesting things is the types of food sensitivities that develop when a person has leaky gut are known as IgG food sensitivities. Mm-hmm. This is a specific type of antibody that's produced. And the thyroid antibodies, which mark the thyroid gland for destruction by the immune system, are also of the IgG branch. So whenever we have a leaky gut and whenever we're eating foods, the body's going to be producing more and more of these IgG antibodies. In most cases, people do have small amounts of thyroid antibodies, and these are there so that the immune system knows to play a cleanup role whenever thyroid cells die, because on a day-to-day basis, we do have various cells in our bodies dying and replicating. And so normal levels of these antibodies are normal. But what happens in the case of intestinal permeability or leaky gut, we have an increased production of these antibodies. So rather than the immune system getting a message saying like, hey, there's a little bit of a cleanup work for you to do in the thyroid gland, the immune system's getting the message of saying, hey, the thyroid gland is a mess. You need to send all of your troops in. Once the immune system starts sending more cells into the thyroid gland, these cells actually begin to cause inflammation and damage to the surrounding thyroid tissue. And that's what's known as thyroiditis, or inflammation of the thyroid gland, which then results in most cases of underactive thyroid. So it's really the leaky gut that sort of perpetuates and perhaps initiates the autoimmune response to the thyroid gland. Some of the other ways that, and there's a lot of different theories about how this works, but another theory is if there's an infection inside of the thyroid gland, the immune system will try to attack the infection and will also attack the home where the infection lives. And so again, when you have a leaky gut and permeability, the immune cells may begin to lose their specificity. So rather than knowing who and where to attack with GPS-like precision, they'll attack the whole entire organ.
So is the thyroid gland likely to get infections more than other organs, or is there some susceptibility there?
Yeah, the thyroid gland is more likely to pick up infections as well as it's more likely to pick up toxins. And so it's sort of known as a hoarder. It likes to accumulate various things because it does concentrate iodine from our foods, and that's one of its main roles. And so we find that we have higher levels of toxins and perhaps infections. Specifically, viral infections are going to be more commonly within the thyroid gland itself. But really, any kind of infection within the body, if it looks like the thyroid gland, and there's various infections that have been described in the literature, ranging from Yersinia, which is a gut infection, to Borrelia, which is a bacteria that causes Lyme disease. These infections, these bacteria have protein structures on them that look similar to protein structures on the thyroid gland. And I believe with the Borrelia bacteria, there's 19 different ones that have been isolated. And so what happens is the immune system, I like to think of it as kind of these little snapshots of what to attack. We'll see this protein structure that'll have a few different proteins in a row, and the immune system will get the message to attack whatever looks like this, like, hey, this is the enemy. And in the case when the immune system is not properly developed, it might start attacking things that are similar to that protein structure. And a lot of times it may be parts of the thyroid gland. This is known as the molecular mimicry theory of autoimmune disease.
Molecular mimicry, okay, yeah. So here we have, then initially there's all this other material in the bloodstream due to leaky gut, which triggers the immune system. So now your immune system is in high gear, and then this molecular mimicry, it's these proteins that are similar to either those food particles or the infection, the bugs causing the infection. It becomes under specific attack. And how does this toxicity play into this? Does the toxin make the fact that the thyroid concentrates these toxins? Does that make it also more likely to get that there would be an autoimmune issue there? Because how does that work?
That's a really great question. And so the way that toxins work is they cause initially damage and inflammation to the thyroid gland. And we talked about some of those immune cells that get kind of told to go to the thyroid gland. So whenever there's more damage, more immune cells are going to show up. And so that can be another potential way of triggering thyroid disease. And really anything that makes our bodies feel like they're unsafe. So whether that's an infection, whether that's a food that we're eating that we shouldn't be eating, whether that's a lot of stress, or whether that's a toxin in our environment, all these things can potentially be contributing to the development of autoimmune thyroid disease.
Yeah. Okay. So 3 avenues here: toxins, infections, and leaky gut were the main ones that we've covered so far, all of which can stimulate an immune attack on the thyroid gland. Is this common? Do a lot of people have Hashimoto's? Does everyone who has a hypothyroid have Hashimoto's originally, or what's the prevalence?
Yeah, about 28% of our general population in the United States does have Hashimoto's. The tests that are done for thyroid function often are not going to pick up an abnormal thyroid until somebody's had Hashimoto's for about 10 years. So this is something that's going to be an issue in many, many people. I would say majority of people, probably 90 to 95% of them who take thyroid medications are going to have Hashimoto's. And people with an underactive thyroid, there are other kinds of root causes, but Hashimoto's is going to be the most common one, accounting for upwards of 90 to 95% of the time.
Okay, so 90 to 95% of the time a person has hypothyroid, it's due to Hashimoto's, and you're saying 28% of the general population has this. Now, I know that this disease affects women more than men. So is this 28% females or 28% of the general population? Because that may mean something like, 53 or 54% of women.
Exactly. So for every one man that's affected, there are 5 to 8 women affected. So 28% is just within our general population. For women, we can be looking at potentially 1 in 3 or even 1 in 2 women affected at some point in their lifetime. And hormones do seem to play a role. Any hormonal changes, we know women go through puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause, which are 3 times in life when they have increased or changes in in estrogen. And these are also three peak times when we see a diagnosis in Hashimoto's and a change in thyroid function. So definitely women are going to be more commonly affected.
And was this always the case? I mean, 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 women being affected by thyroid disorders. Is this a modern phenomena or an industrialized nation phenomena, or has it always been this way?
That's such a great question. So about Hashimoto's was recognized a little bit over 100 years ago. Back in the day, the primary cause of hypothyroidism or an underactive thyroid was iodine deficiency. So iodine is a required nutrient that's used to make thyroid hormones, and in most developing countries, that's still the case. However, in the United States and most of Europe, most of Australia, public health officials realized that this was hypothyroidism was caused by low iodine, so they began to add iodine to our salt supplies, or in some cases, different types of supplies throughout the environment. And eventually what happened is that the iodine can cause more inflammation in the thyroid gland. So iodine is a Goldilocks nutrient where you need to have just the right amounts of it to make sure that you don't have iodine deficiency hypothyroidism, but too much of it can actually cause more damage to the thyroid gland and more inflammation to the thyroid gland.
So Did you say the Goldilocks nutrient?
It is the Goldilocks nutrient because you need to have just the right amounts of it. So if it's too high, you can have thyroid inflammation, and that leads to Hashimoto's. And if it's too low, you're going to have hypothyroidism due to iodine deficiency. So you need to have this like really sweet spot of iodine. And once well-meaning public health officials started adding iodine to our salt supply, people started getting too much iodine, or maybe they didn't have it balanced with other kinds of nutrients. And then we started seeing higher rates of Hashimoto's developing. And this has been seen in countries all over the world. So, countries that have recently added iodine to the salt supply, they would test the levels of thyroid antibodies in their population, or they added the iodine, and then 10 years later, and they found that the rates of Hashimoto's, have increased, in some cases doubled, tripled, sometimes quadrupled. So that's going to be one of the factors. And it's it would be wonderful to say like there's just one nutrient we need, and this is what this is going to take care of everything for us. But we know the body doesn't live, the thyroid gland doesn't live by itself in a vacuum. And so we have all these different things that play a role. And definitely if you have more iodine on board, that means your thyroid gland is working harder. And as it's working harder, it's releasing different kinds of chemicals and byproducts. And some of these byproducts can be inflammatory if you have other types of nutrients on board. So selenium is a nutrient that can actually reduce the oxidative stress that occurs when the thyroid gland is doing its job in processing iodine. And so, really looking at the body as a whole is important in this, because selenium deficiency can result from not having enough of it in our diet, from the type of foods that we eat, and it could also result from having a leaky gut or intestinal permeability, because then we're not absorbing selenium from our food effectively.
So selenium is kind of a cure. So Brazil nuts, right, are useful for people who have too much iodine in their thyroid. Is that the case?
Brazil nuts can be helpful, and I also like to see the use of selenium as a supplement. So selenium 200 micrograms or so. Actually 200 micrograms specifically has been shown to reduce thyroid antibodies, which are a measure of how aggressive the immune system is attacking the thyroid gland. So over the course of 3 months of using selenium 200 micrograms once per day, people will see about their antibody get cut by about half. And so that's really great news. Brazil nuts can be helpful with that as well. The only challenge with it is depending on what soil they were grown in, we don't really know how much selenium they're going to have. And selenium is another one of those Goldilocks nutrients where if you go under 200 micrograms, you're not really going to be helping your thyroid. If you go above 800 micrograms, you're going to be, you can potentially be toxic from it. So I like to see people using a supplement for that particular food. But eating a Brazil nut here and there, or 2 a day can also be helpful as long as you're not sensitive to nuts.
Okay. Are there other foods that tend to be high in selenium? I know Brazil nuts, but are there others?
There's different types of selenized yeast that can be high in selenium. Generally for this nutrient, this is one of the few nutrients where I do recommend doing a
Yeah.
supplement.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I hear you on that.
Just it's so soil dependent that it's really hard to tell unless you're like analyzing the food that that you're eating and analyzing the soil. So it's like depending on where you get your food, you could be deficient or you can be getting enough of it, right?
Uh huh. All right. Well, so then what is the strategy? So supplementing selenium. What about the rest of this? You've talked about leaky gut. You've talked about infections. We've talked about the thyroid cleaning up toxicity. We mentioned toxins as well. How does one begin to approach even one knowing which of those three causes is the one cause for them, or two, what do we start to do about it? What is a kind of holistic approach that someone could take to start resolving this before their thyroid is effectively nuked by their immune system?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the thyroid that we're concerned about. So we know that when you have one autoimmune condition, that can be progressive. So you have, if you can, you may start off having Hashimoto's, and then you're taking the thyroid medications, and you just do that, there's a greater chance that you're going to develop another autoimmune condition like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or scleroderma because the immune system stays out of balance. So it'll just find new types of organs to attack. So it might start off the attack on the thyroid and then move to your, move to your joints or move to your pancreas or liver, or whatever the case is. So that's one really, really important thing to keep in mind. The good news is there are things you can do to reduce your attack on the thyroid gland, reduce the autoimmunity in your body, and completely eliminate your symptoms. And I like to use a really holistic approach where we look at the body as a whole. So I'm not just looking at whether or not a person needs thyroid hormones. In some cases, they might need them, and that's something they can get working with their physician or a naturopathic doctor or chiropractor or any kind of other healthcare professional can help them get on the right track to getting optimal thyroid hormones, whether that's through medication, natural desiccated thyroid, or perhaps even some glandular products. So that's going to be just one small piece of it, but oftentimes doing something like that can help a person tremendously with their symptoms. The other things to really consider are going to be looking after the liver, the adrenals, and the gut. So we talked about how toxins can contribute to a development of autoimmune disease. And one of the very great things people can do, and it's really, really quick, it just takes about 2 weeks, is to start reducing the toxic burden in their bodies. And I recommend that in my book, Hashimoto's Protocol. I have a 2-week protocol in there where we go through and we remove all of these things that are potentially toxic to the body or that are acting like toxins. And so one of the things we remove is fluoride. So I recommend getting a reverse osmosis filter. Fluoride is one of those things that gets concentrated in the thyroid gland and starts causing inflammation. Fluoride levels in our waters have been correlated to thyroid disease. So the higher the amounts of fluoride, the more likely you are to have thyroid disease. Back in the day, not many people knew this, but before the development of thyroid suppressing medications, fluoride was used as a thyroid suppressant because of its propensity to damage thyroid cells. So that's one of the very first things that I recommend people do. The second thing that I like to see them do is figure out what some of their food sensitivities and food triggers are. So gluten, dairy, and soy are the most common reactive foods. These are really big proteins that when you have a leaky gut, they're not going to be broken down properly. And when they get into your bloodstream, they're going to be causing an uprise in those IgG cells that then cause you to attack your thyroid gland more. So getting off of those foods for a few weeks can be really, really helpful. And then we're talking about doing things that can support your body's own detoxification pathways. So these things like milk thistle, green juices, green smoothies, really wonderful foods, whole foods that you can do to help you detoxify more naturally. And within 2 weeks, it's been really quite amazing because I've had people who were sick and symptomatic for 10 to 20 years who were able to get rid of their symptoms within 2 weeks. One woman was sent me a message right around Christmas time. She had chronic fatigue and multiple chemical sensitivities, thyroid antibodies, and all of these other joint pains and a lot of these thyroid symptoms. And within 2 weeks, she said she was back. She was able to go shopping with her kids for the first time at the mall because prior to that, she was so chemically sensitive that just walking past something like a Yankee Candle store would make her really, really ill. So that's one of the very first things I recommend doing. The next thing I recommend that people do is focus on their adrenal health. The adrenals are our stress organs. And we talked about toxins, we talked about infections, and we talked about stress. So stress is a really, really big common trigger, and it basically weakens our defenses. So whenever we're stressed out, we're not going to be as resilient. We're going to be more susceptible to various types of infections that can cause us to have that can trigger us to have thyroid disease, and we're not going to be able to overcome the infections as easily. And so making sure that you're getting off of the caffeine, because that's going to be a huge pusher of stress for you. Making sure that you're getting at least 10 hours of sleep each night for, I recommend for 30 days, doing like a spa holiday where you're doing a lot of relaxing, perhaps doing some yoga, deep breathing, hot baths, anything that you can possibly think of that's relaxing to you. You do that for 1 month.
I don't think anyone's going to complain about that.
That's common people's very favorite recommendation. So it's basically you have permission to not do the things that you don't like doing. You have permission to cancel plans, to get rid of responsibilities. If you can take a staycation from work, that would be fabulous. And just really try to take that month for yourself to relax. We also help to do some things like adaptogen herbs. Ashwagandha is a really great one that helps us tolerate stress better. Taking some B vitamins, thiamine and B12 are some of my favorites for thyroid health. They can help you with fatigue, and then vitamin C. So these are things that you can do for 1 month, and a lot of times people will find that their symptoms will start falling away within that month, and also will see an improvement in their thyroid antibodies. And then the third thing that I have everybody do is really look after their gut health. So getting off of additional foods, sometimes gluten, dairy, and soy are all you need to get rid of. For other people, they might need to get rid of grains and even eggs, sometimes even nuts, depending on what foods are causing inflammation in their bodies. And we do that for about 6 weeks, where we get off of these inflammatory foods. We do things like omega-3 fatty acids that can help with reducing inflammation and help with healing the gut. We do zinc, L-glutamine, which is a wonderful amino acid that helps to heal up the gut. And then also we do probiotics and fermented foods, as well as things like bone broth that can help to heal up the gut. And that's kind of the thing that everybody can do for 6 to 12 weeks that can help themselves with feeling tremendously better with reducing the autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland. And once we've kind of done these foundational things, then we can start thinking about going after other types of triggers like infections or toxins.
Great. So I used to be allergic to poison ivy, to the point where if I got within 10 feet of a poison ivy plant, I'd be in the hospital.
Wow.
Within a few days. And so in studying Ayurveda, and in particular going after my liver, healing my liver, restoring my liver, and to some extent cleansing the liver, my immune system is just way less reactive in general. And so you started this three-pronged foundational approach, talking about removing toxins and supporting the liver. And detoxification is such a big field, and there's all kinds of nuances to detoxification. Yes, Ayurveda offers a lot of specificity in terms of constitution for detoxification, but Dr. Wentz here is talking about some of the specific toxins that get lodged in the thyroid as well. And so we need to look, when we're doing a detoxification program, yes, general liver cleansing and also liver restoration. We can't forget liver restoration as well. Liver needs to be strengthened, not just cleansed of the toxins. But Dr. Wentz is also talking about specific toxins that will get lodged in the thyroid, and I'm assuming that's covered in her book, and some of those specific things to watch out for. So very helpful there. And then this in a way almost prophylactic approach regarding the adrenal glands. That in general, by preventing stress in the first place, you can prevent these infections from attacking your thyroid. And if you're already past that point, the preventative point, then what in Ayurveda we would call a kaya kalpa, which just means a period of rest and relaxation, not just a weekend either. It's got to be a little bit longer. It takes time for your body to restore itself. It takes time for your body to build strength. You don't go to the gym and lift weights for 2 or 3 days and come out looking like a muscle man. So you don't restore your body in a weekend either. This takes a longer period of time. So it's a season. A season of rest is what Dr. Wentz is recommending here. And finally, getting down to perhaps the source for many people's Hashimoto's, which is that gut permeability, and removing foods, and you specifically suggested gluten, dairy, and soy as common triggers. And in Ayurveda, we frequently will recommend an elimination diet for someone where they eat a diet with very few ingredients and then start to add ingredients back in so they notice sensitivities. If you're getting gas and bloating, if you're getting other digestive upsets, you can be sure that your digestive tract is getting inflamed and that you're perhaps getting more and more vulnerable to gut permeability. And then, of course, once this foundation is laid of gut health, adrenal health, and liver health, then what Dr. Wentz is saying is that she's going to use her expertise, or the expertise in her book, to help you identify the specific trigger that is affecting your thyroid, because it's going to be different. She gave some examples of some differences, and she's going to know what symptoms correlate with what types of different types of reasons that the thyroid is being effective, and how to come up with some kind of plan for you. So how does one I'm interested to know how one even gets tested for thyroid disorders, and the second, I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about the kind of structure, the solution you offer. I mean, it looks like you're offering, you have this book. Do you do consultations with people? How exactly does a person start to think about using some of the specific, wisdom, information, expertise that you have to feel better?
Yeah, so the testing for thyroid disease, we alluded to talking about some of the testing, and it may not pick up Hashimoto's until somebody's had issues for almost 10 years. And this was my case. I kept going to the doctor, and I was getting tests done for my thyroid, and I was told that my thyroid function was normal, when in fact my thyroid gland was under attack for all this time, but nobody did the right tests. So most doctors will just do a test called the TSH test, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. And this test is really great for if you've had hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's for 10, 20 years, and a large amount of your thyroid gland has been destroyed. Then that TSH will start rising, and doctors will say, okay, now we're going to put you on thyroid hormones. The challenge is for the first 10 years or so, when your thyroid gland is under attack, that TSH may still be within the normal limits, or what doctors consider normal. We know that the TSH for, let's just say a woman of childbearing age be somewhere around 1, where some doctors will say that a TSH of as high as 10 is considered normal. I'll tell you, when my TSH was at like a 4.5, I was a sloth. I was sleeping for 12 hours a day. And we generally will see high rates of miscarriages when a TSH is above 3. And so these are really important things to keep in mind, is if you did have that TSH test done and your doctor told you that it was normal, it may actually not be normal. So you want to take a copy of your test test results, and anything above 1 would be considered potentially as hypothyroid. There are other tests you can do as well, and they're known as thyroid antibody tests. And these are tests that are going to reveal that the immune system has begun to recognize the thyroid gland as a foreign invader and has started a launch against the thyroid gland. And this is going to be the TPO test and TG test. So it's thyroid peroxidase antibodies, abbreviated as TPO, and then thyroglobulin antibodies, abbreviated as TG. And these are tests that you can ask for from your doctor. And there's also various online portals. I know I'm set up with Ulta Labs where a person can get a TSH test and then their thyroid antibody tests, as well as some of the other hormones for like $88 if their doctor won't order their test. So that's one thing to do. I would say if somebody's looking for solutions and looking for help, a lot of times they're not necessarily going to be able to get the help that they need from a thyroid specialist like an endocrinologist or their primary care doctor, other than helping them get thyroid medications. And in some cases, they don't even get them on the right kind of thyroid medications because the synthetic thyroid hormones only have one type of thyroid hormone in them, known as T4, where the biggest hormone, the most important hormone, is known as T3. And while on paper we're supposed to convert T4 to T3 just fine, that doesn't always happen in the body. So what I really encourage people to do is to work with a functional medicine practitioner, such as a MD trained in functional medicine or a Catholic doctor, sometimes chiropractic physician, nutritionist. There are various healthcare professionals that are trained in that, and then utilizing my book along with it. So the Hashimoto's protocol, we talk about the fundamental things that everybody can do. So this is going to be supporting the liver, supporting the adrenals, and the gut. And then I take people through a series of assessments that can help them figure out which type of additional triggers they have. So we'll ask them questions, and that'll lead us to figure out whether or not they have a specific infection or a toxin. This is based on my experience with working with over 1,000 people with Hashimoto's over the last few years, figuring out what their common root causes and triggers were. So I've identified about 20 different potential root causes. And we go through that and we help the person figure out what their particular root cause may be. And they, my book is really meant for them to be able to work with on their own with any kind of practitioner they can find. And I also have self-management programs and consulting available for people who are having a hard time finding somebody within their community to work with.
Great. So a few quick questions on what you just presented. So this TPO and TG test, that's the one that's going to give you the answer before your thyroid is destroyed, right? Is that the... Yeah, okay.
Exactly, and it's so important to know that because you can prevent damage to the thyroid gland, you can prevent the development of other types of autoimmune conditions. And even with just those numbers elevated, with just that attack, you're going to be symptomatic. But most doctors will tell you that you're crazy and it's in there, and then it's in your head, and don't believe them. So
Yeah. Well, why wait until the gland is destroyed? The fact is that our body has an abundant amount of a thyroid gland, so that your thyroid still works until it gets down to very, severely damaged levels, and that's when you start to see the TSH levels being affected. So that's kind of end stage. What we want to do is get more on the preventative side of things. If you're getting the symptoms that you were getting, like feeling like a sloth, as you said, when you were at 4.5, well, we want to catch it while you still have a thyroid gland. That's what we want here, right? We want to save the thyroid gland. So, so great. So the TPO and TG test is the one to get, not the TSH test. Of course, the TSH test can report whether the thyroid gland is damaged. So it's not that we're not going to get that one, but we want to get these early warning tests as well.
Exactly.
Great to hear. Oh yeah. Great to hear that people can use your book even if they're working with a local practitioner, and that they can reach out if they're having trouble finding one. Maybe there's not a person who specializes in thyroid in your area, and then you can get it right from the source, right from the expert, some specific help working through your particular issue. Thank you so much, Dr. Wentz. This is extraordinarily helpful. I know that that thousands of people from our who are getting our newsletter are going to be very interested in what you have to say.
Thank you so much for having me. And if people wanted to connect with me, they can go to thyroidpharmacist.com/protocol, and we'll give them some goodies that can be helpful on their journey, like recipes and meal plans.
Okay, perfect. And we'll include a link to that URL wherever we post this video. So that way you can easily find and get connected, get the book, or some of these other resources that are provided online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll cut it right there.
Perfect. Yay. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, did that